Senator Sanders was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006 after serving 60 years in the House of Representatives. He is the longest-serving independent member of Congress in American history and sits on the Veterans Committee and was tapped by Senate leadership to be the ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee. He also serves on the Environment and Public Works, the Energy and National Resources, the Joint Economic, and on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committees. Ladies and gentlemen, Bernie Sanders.
A lot of people out there are beautiful, and I thank you very much. I want to thank Russell Green, among others, for helping to organize the event. Trent and Liz and David for their very cogent comments, and I think there's nothing they said that I don't fully agree with. And thank Ian, not only for moderating today, but I'm sure all of you know one of the great issues that we face is how we get the truth out through the corporate media, and that's not easy. And there are a number of courageous, progressive radio talk show people and others who are doing great work, and Ian as well. Ian, thank you so much. What I want to do this afternoon is to do something with you that is not done very often in America. We're going to practice democracy. A radical idea, I know. We may get arrested for doing it, but what the hell? And that is, we're going to do what is supposed to be done in this country. I'm an elected official. I'm supposed to tell you what I think, and you are citizens of this country, and you're supposed to tell me what you think, and we have a discussion, and we go forward. That is a radical idea, which very rarely happens in America, but we are going to make that happen. What I want to talk about is my perception of the problems facing our country. Tell you what I think we should be doing to go forward. Tell you what I think the nature of the very strong opposition is, and then how we figure out where we go from there. And I think the first point that I want to make is that what our opponents would like us to do in these very difficult times, and I'm going to be straightforward, and I'm going to tell you about what's going on in America. You're not going to hear it from too many elected officials, but I'll tell you. And the news is not good. But at the end of the day, what they would like us to believe is that making change is hopeless. You can't make change. Don't bother to vote. We are so powerful, you will never beat us. Give it up. So the first point that I want to make is that if they achieve that goal, then we're going to go nowhere in a hurry. What we have got to understand is that forever, and for in our own country, decades and decades, wonderful people have struggled for civil rights, struggled for women's rights, struggled for gay rights, struggled for environmental rights, struggled for workers' rights. And over those years, huge victories have been won. But if there's one lesson that we know, nothing is ever won unless millions of people stand up and fight back. And this struggle is not just about us, and you all understand that. I have 4 kids, I have 7 grandchildren, you have kids and you have grandchildren. We are fighting for future generations. We are fighting for the future of this planet. We cannot afford to lose this struggle. Now, let me be very frank and tell you that in order to move this country forward and to create the policies that we need, we are going to need a political revolution in this country. what does that revolution entail? Let me just tell you a little bit. You've heard some of it already from these very fine panelists. The political revolution has got to include election reform and significantly increasing voter turnout. Change will never take place when 36% of the people vote, when 80% of young people do not vote. There are countries in Europe, Denmark comes to mind, where 85, 90% of people vote. They actually practice democracy. They know that democracy is not a spectator sport. So that is the first thing. What the revolution is about is to tell people they've got to turn the damn television off, and they've got to start standing up and dealing with the real issues facing our country and figure out ways to make the changes that we need to make. We've heard wonderful discussion of this today, but real change will never take place unless we have real campaign finance reform and we need the public funding of elections. You know, I was the former chair of the Veterans Committee, and in that capacity met many, many wonderful people. People who fought in World War II and Korea and Vietnam and more recently in Iraq and Afghanistan. People who put their lives on the line. And I'm sitting and I think and I shake my head. They fought for democracy in many respects, not for a political system where billionaires can buy elections. That we talk about, and they're all important, whether it's the environment and fracking, whether it's TPP. At the end of the day, if billionaires can buy elections, members of Congress will be paid employees of the billionaire class. Yeah! Let me tell you, Vermont, we don't do standing ovations. Let me tell you this. You think Citizens United is a disgrace? You think Citizens United is the worst Supreme Court decision? Let me tell you, be clear. For the Republican Party, Citizens United, as I think you know, did not go far enough. Right now, what Citizens United says is that billionaires can spend as much as they want in the political process with TV and radio and everything else as independent expenditures. What the Republican leadership now wants is to do away with all campaign finance limitations. What that means, in English, and this is something the Koch brothers have wanted for decades, they want a system where on a given day in a room like this, although I suspect that people would look a little bit different, they will be able to stand up, and this is true, literally true. They will be able to stand up and say, look, we're going to spend billions of dollars on an election, because we're worth $85 billion. And if you want to run for governor of California, we're going to make out a check directly to you, no more independent expenditures, for $300 million. And there's your speechwriter, and there's your campaign manager, and there is your media person. I own you. You work for me. No intermediaries. None of this independent expenditure business. I will give you a check, you work for me. That is their goal. That is now what the leadership of the Republican Party believes in. When we talk about a political revolution, it's not only ending voter suppression and making it easier for people to vote rather than harder for people to vote. It's not only campaign finance reform. Let me tell you what it also is. It is radical changes in media. Because right now, on issue after issue, the media simply is not telling the American people what is going on. That's the simple truth. Let me just give you a few examples here. We've got to figure this out. I don't have all the answers on this, but we have got to figure this out. The Republican Party has their own cable television network, as you know, owned by a right-wing billionaire. Ian is one of the few, something like 95% of talk radio is extreme right-wing. Okay, that's what they got. And then you have all the other corporate media. Let me just give you some examples, just a few examples. A year ago, there was a study done by a group called Media Matters. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah, they did a study. What they do is basically monitor what goes on in the media. And they found that in the issue of climate change, which the scientific community considers to be the most serious environmental crisis facing this planet, they looked at what television was doing, they found there was virtually no discussion about climate change. Some of us in the Senate wrote a letter to the presidents of ABC, CBS, and NBC, and CNN. Actually, a couple of weeks later, they put climate change on their Sunday shows. But they ignore what the scientific community believes is the most important issue facing our planet. Talk about TPP. There was a study done a month or so ago. They looked at network television, and what they found, I don't know if it's changed since, but a month ago, do you know how much discussion of the largest trade agreement in the history of America, how much time was spent on the major networks? That's right, 0. Now you can argue for TPP, you can argue against TPP, I'm strongly against TPP, but how? How is it possible that on an issue of such consequence, and Liz did a great job talking about it, that it is not on television? I'll give you another example. As Ian mentioned, I'm the ranking member, leader of the opposition on the Budget Committee. We just went through the budget this week. I was up all night Thursday night dealing with this stuff, all right? The Republican budget, I don't want to go into great lengths, just tell you a simple fact. It repeals the Affordable Care Act and cuts Medicaid by $440 billion, okay? Among many other things. When you do that, and nobody debates this, 27 million Americans are thrown off of health insurance. Now, have you seen on network television or front pages of paper the headline, Republicans throw 27 million people off of health care? You didn't see that headline, and you didn't see that program on television. So the difficulty that we have is that on issue after issue, all of these issues, I believe, and on many other issues that I'm going to discuss, the American people are on our side. I don't use, Ian used the word the left. I don't use that. I'm a member of the left. I don't use that. The issues that we believe in, that we're going to talk about today, are the issues that the vast majority of the American people believe in. And don't ever forget it. You go out, and I know California and Vermont are progressive states, but you go to conservative states. You know, you go to Utah, go to Alabama, go to Mississippi, and you ask people whether they think it is a good idea to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid and give huge tax breaks for billionaires. And you know what they will tell you? That is crazy. All right? So I want everybody in this room to understand. You and your views represent the vast majority of the American people. Our challenge is to bring those people together and to organize and to educate. Now, one of the other things that bothers me a lot about corporate media is they look at politics like it is a football game or a game show or a game of survival. It's about personality, it's about my hair, Hillary's hair, or somebody's hair, it's about dumb things that you may say, it's about how much money you've raised. Any idiot who's worth $1 billion who announces he wants to run for president is by definition a serious candidate. That's true. That's true, because money is all they look at. Because they assume that somebody with $1 billion can buy elections, and that's what they look at. What about the ideas? What about the issues? Not relevant at all. So what we're going to do is talk about some of those issues tonight. We'll start off with the economy, and when we talk about the economy, I think the most important point to understand is that this country faces more serious problems than at any time since the 1930s and the Great Depression. The essential issue is that despite huge increases in technology and productivity, every worker in this room produces more than a person doing similar work 30 or 40 years ago. So if you are producing more, you might think of one or two things. I am producing more, I'm making more money. Or I am producing more and I'm working fewer hours. And you're laughing because the truth is people are making less and they're working longer hours. And we have got to understand why that happens. When I was in college, this is true, they actually, we're seeing the beginning of robotics and technology and all that stuff, and there was an expectation that, with the result of all that new technology, the work hours of people would go down and down. And the courses they were given were, what will the American people do when they only work 15 or 20 hours a week? What kind of leisure activity will fill up their days? Needless to say, those courses are not taught anymore. The American people now work almost as long hours as do the people of any country. In my state, you got people working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 4 jobs, absolutely taken for granted. People working 50 hours a week, people working 50, 60 hours a week. Do you remember the signs in the early 1900s of trade unionists and workers standing up and saying, we want the 40-hour week? Remember that? Well, damn it, we still want the 40-hour week. And now, the courses that they teach are how families can survive with all of the stress that they are living under. I mean, just tell you a story. I remember a few years ago, I was grocery shopping, and a woman stopped me outside the store. She said, I am working 50 hours a week. My husband is working different time. He's working 60 hours a week. We have a kid. We want to have more kids, but we don't think we can be good parents under those conditions. The stress just going around this country. People are worried that they're going to lose their job. Their factory is going to China. They're worried that if they're 50 or 60, they're going to be replaced by a 21-year-old who will be paid half the salary. Half the people in this country have savings of less than $10,000. And you know what that means? That means you're an automobile accident. It means you are a divorce. It means you are an illness away from financial disaster. And people are living under that kind of stress. Today in America, we have tens of millions of people who are working longer hours for lower wages. We have over 45 million Americans now living in poverty because as the middle class disappears, people fall into poverty, and that number is almost as high as any time in the modern history of this country. We have almost 20% of our kids living in poverty, which is by far the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. And despite the limited success of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, we still have 35 million people with no health insurance, and many people, I suspect, including people in this room, who have high deductibles and high co-payments. We remain, shamefully, the only country in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care to all people. And that is something we've got to change. Along with the stress, the real stress that affects people's life, impacts their health, there is also a lot of anger out there. And sometimes that anger takes the form of conservatives in the Tea Party or progressives on our side. But people are angry. I want to tell you a little bit why they are angry. Since 1999, the median middle-class family, that family right in the middle of the American economy, has seen its income go down by $5,000. Got that? Since 1999. We have the great global economy, we have all this technology, we have all of this stuff median family income has gone down by $5,000. That same family earned almost $500 less last year than it did 26 years ago, back in 1989. So people are wondering, why is it? Why is it they're working longer hours, they're working harder, and they're falling further and further behind? Talk about anger. That male worker, the man right in the middle of the American economy, made $783 less last year than he did 42 years ago. That woman in the middle of the American economy earned $1,300 less last year than she did in 2007. Since 2005, that same family in the middle of the economy has seen its wealth go down by more than 36%. Today, and I'm going to raise issues with you that people don't talk about, but we need to talk about. We got 5.5 million young people in this country who either dropped out of high school, and we have a terrible rate of high school dropouts, or graduated high school. And you know what these 5.5 million kids are doing today? They're doing nothing. They're hanging around on street corners. They're getting involved in stupid, self-destructive activities, and too many of them are ending up in jail. Which tells me that maybe we should invest in education and job training and not in jail. When we talk about why the middle class has disappeared, what we have got to understand is that since 2001, we have lost in this country over 60,000 factories and millions of good paying jobs. There was once a time when young people graduated high school and they were able to get a job in a factory, and if they had a union, they can make decent wages with decent benefits, decent pensions. 30 years ago, in one paragraph, I could tell you the transition of the American economy. 30 years ago, the largest employer in America was General Motors. Good wages, good benefits, strong union. Today, the largest employer in America is Walmart. How are the wages? Virtually no benefits and vehemently anti-union. In one paragraph, that is a metaphor for what has happened to the American economy. One of the reasons, although not the only reason, that we have lost tens of thousands of factories and millions of decent paying jobs is precisely what we've been talking about today, our disastrous trade agreements. You are looking at somebody who voted against NAFTA, voted against NAFTA. Voted against the Chinese agreement and so forth, and is damn well going to vote against this TPP. And I remember as clear as yesterday, when this NAFTA thing was made, you had all of corporate America, all of the corporate media. You have the Washington Post running editorial after editorial, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the LA Times. We researched this, talking about media, to find that we found a paper in Toledo, Ohio. I think it was the 83rd largest paper in America that was against the NAFTA agreement. And the argument was, all of the great jobs that we are going to create when we have free trade with Mexico and free trade with China and all that stuff. Funny story, I'll tell you. I was in China 10, 15 years ago. And we were at a Walmart place in China with a guy who was head of Walmart in Asia. It was very interesting. Walking there, and Walmart there looks a lot like Walmart in America. Basically does. And all kinds of American products were there. All kinds of American soap and sporting goods and everything else. And I asked the guy, I said, I'm just kind of curious, I see all these American products here. How many of them are actually made in the United States of America? And he was very sheepish about it. And he hemmed it and he said 1%. And of course it makes sense. Why would you build products in America, pay people $15, $20 an hour, have environmental standards, have to deal with unions when you can build those products in China. And that is what unfettered free trade is about. And that is why this is a huge issue. It's not a sexy issue. It's not an issue the media talks about. But our demand has got to be that all of these corporations every night on TV, they're telling us buy this and buy that and buy that. We have got to tell them, if you want us to buy the damn products, stop manufacturing them here in the United States and not in China. No country is a great country if it does not respect intellectual activity, if it does not respect education. Yeah. There was once a time, 30, 40 years ago, when the United States led the world in terms of the percentage of our people who are college graduates. Today, we are in 12th place. And you want to hear a tragedy, is you got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of bright young people, people who have so much to offer, people who are begging and crying out for education, who have decided that they are not going to go to college because they don't want to leave school $50,000, $80,000 in debt. You have millions of other people who did go to college and are now hugely in debt. I talked to a woman in Burlington, Vermont, last year, and she is doing exactly what we need. We have a real crisis in terms of primary health care physicians. Real crisis. She went to medical school. She's not some fancy specialist. She's actually doing primary care for low-income people. Exactly what we need. She came out of school $300,000 in debt. Talked to dentists coming out with a dental crisis, affordable dental care, very serious problem. Dentists are coming out of school $250,000 in debt. In other words, we are doing everything that we can to make it impossible for young people who have the desire, who have the ability to get the education they need. Meanwhile, in Germany and countries around the world, they understand that the future of their countries rests with their young people. Instead of spending huge sums of money on the military, they're investing it in education. I will be introducing, within the month, legislation that will provide free tuition for every public college and university in America. And that's the This is what's been going on for so many years. And here's the irony. 40 years ago, how much did it cost to go to the University of California? Anybody know? Nothing. 40 years ago, and the University of California then and now, one of the great public universities around the world. City College of New York, a great college. Tuition free. You had state colleges all over this country, tuition free or almost free. And now, college is unaffordable. What kind of priorities is it where we say to young people and their families, we're going to make it impossible or very difficult for you to get the education that you need? It's unfair to the individual. It is stupid for the future of our country. Let me just say a word about health care. I voted for the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. I think it has made some progress. But right now, as I mentioned a moment ago, we remain the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people. Meanwhile, with 35 million people uninsured, with many underinsured, we spend far, far more per capita on health care than do the other countries who all have cost-effective, universal health care systems. That is why I believe we need a Medicare for all single-payer program. Now, it is not the pain and confusion of the moment that we're in. It's not just that the middle class is disappearing and that poverty is very, very high. You know, if we were in a town, if all of us were in a small town, and you know, it happens, a tornado comes through the whole town and wreaks destruction, we all look around and say, my God, this was a terrible disaster that impacted the whole community. But that is not what is happening in America today. All of you know that today the United States has by far the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth, and worse in this country than at any time since the late 1920s, and the gap between the very, very, very rich and everybody else is growing wider and wider and wider. So it's not just that the middle class is disappearing. People are seeing themselves working longer hours for lower wages. They're scared to death as to what will happen to their kids, and then they find out that the billionaires and the millionaires are doing extraordinarily well. Now I'm going to bore you for a moment, but I think it's important for you to hear just some of the statistical reality of what's going on in this country. And by the way, all of this information is up on my website, sanders.senate.gov. But here it is. Today, the top 1% own 41.8% of the financial wealth of America. Today, the bottom 60%, majority of the American people, own all of 1.7%. Got that? Top 1% owns 41.8%, the bottom 60% own 1.7%. In fact, the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. The top 1/10 of 1%. Today, one family, and no one argues with these facts, I'm not making them up. These are solid facts. No one debates it. One family, the Walton family of Walmart, that family alone owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. Over the past 40 years, we have witnessed an enormous transfer of wealth. Our right-wing friends hate the idea of wealth distribution, right? They're very much against it. And of course, what we have seen in the last 40 years is a massive instance of wealth redistribution. The problem is it's going in the wrong direction. Between 1985 and 2013, the bottom 90% lost $10.7 trillion in wealth if wealth distribution had remained at the same level, if they were getting the same percentage of the total pie. They've lost, bottom 90%, $10.7 trillion. Meanwhile, the top 1/10 of 1% experienced an $8 trillion increase in wealth as the distribution of wealth became more and more unequal. Listen to this one. We just discovered this a few days ago. Between 2013 and 2015, the top 14 wealthiest people in this country experienced a $157 billion increase in their wealth in a 2-year period. That increase in wealth in a 2-year period is again more than the bottom 40% of the American people own collectively. When we talk about income as opposed to wealth, what you should all know is that since the Wall Street crash, 99% of all new income generated in America goes to the top 1%. So in a certain sense, it doesn't matter what kind of economic growth we have. Is GDP going up by 2%, 4%? It doesn't matter, because all of the new income is going to the top 1%. Doesn't mean much for the middle class at all. The top 25 hedge fund managers today made more than $24 billion last year. That is enough to pay the full salaries of 425,000 public school teachers. So it is important, I lay that stuff out and I bore you with this information, because it is important for every American to understand not only the immorality of a situation where so few have so much and are seeing so much increase in their wealth, while at the other hand, we have people in this city and in my state who don't know how they're going to feed their family next week, or today, or tomorrow. All right. So what you have is an economic system totally rigged on behalf of the billionaire class. They are getting it all. And the struggle that we face, and it is not going to be an easy struggle, is how we turn that around and how we create a nation in which all people have a decent standard of living. That is what the struggle is about. Now, one of the things that we have got to do as progressives, when we understand, as Ian mentioned earlier, that we have some 63, 64% of the people in the last election not voting, I don't have to tell anybody in this room that people are disgusted, disillusioned with the political process. How do we ignite a fire? How do we make people understand that in fact what happens in Washington or Sacramento is in fact usually important to their lives? And the answer is we need an agenda, a progressive agenda that we stand behind, which impacts the lives of people, which makes sense to ordinary people. All right? Let me very briefly go through what I believe that agenda should be. The first issue, when a pollster asks people the question, what's on your mind? What's the first thing that people say? Jobs. Jobs and income. You know why? Because real unemployment is not 5.5%. Real unemployment today is 11%. Youth unemployment is 17%. African American youth unemployment is off the charts. So what do we need to do? We need a federal program to create millions of decent paying jobs. And the fastest way to do it is to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, roads, bridges. I have introduced legislation with Senator Barbara Mikulski of Maryland, $1 trillion in the next 5 years creates and sustains 13 million jobs. Furthermore, as I think everybody in this room knows, working class in this country is not going to make progress unless we have a strong trade union movement. Scott Walker and his friends want to destroy the trade union movement. Our job is to rebuild the trade union movement. We have got to raise the minimum wage way above the starvation wage of $7.25 an hour. Our goal should be that in the next few years, nobody in this country makes less than $15 an hour. We need pay equity in this country. Women should not be making 78 cents. We need real tax reform in this country so the billionaires and large corporations start paying their fair share of tax. We need to understand that climate change is the most serious environmental crisis facing our world. The United States must lead the world in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. The Republican budget just cut $440 billion from Medicaid, massive cuts in Medicare, massive cuts in nutrition programs, massive cuts in educational programs. Our job is to do exactly the opposite. No senior, no kid should live in poverty in this country. Let me conclude, and you have been very patient, and I thank you for that. Let me conclude by telling you what we are up against. I want you to know this. In 1980, David Koch, one of the Koch brothers, ran for vice president of the United States on the Libertarian Party, and they helped fund the campaign. And the ideas that they brought forth in that campaign 35 years ago remain the ideas of the Koch brothers today. And if you were to ask me what the great political crisis of our time is that the ideas that 35 years ago seemed to be crazy, kooky ideas are today mainstream ideas. I want you to understand, I'm going to read very briefly, exactly, word for word, some of the planks of that platform, and I have zero reason to believe that the Koch brothers do not still hold dear to these ideas. Quote, we favor the abolition of Medicare and Medicaid programs. Now, I'm not talking about cuts. That's what the Republicans are doing. Massive cuts in this budget, Medicare and Medicaid, abolition. We favor the repeal of the fraudulent, virtually bankrupt, and increasingly oppressive Social Security system. Now, we've been at war with these guys for years, and I want to tell you something. Here's some good news. That for the last many years, there have been hundreds of millions of dollars being spent trying to cut Social Security. So far, we've been able to beat them and push them back because we remind the American people. But the Koch brothers do not want to cut Social Security, they want to end Social Security. We propose the abolition of the governmental postal service. We support repeal of all laws which impede the ability of any person to find employment, such as minimum wage laws. Some of us are fighting to raise the minimum wage. They want to do away with the concept of the minimum wage, so that in high unemployment areas, people will be forced to work for $3 or $4 an hour. Quote, we support the abolition of the Environmental Protection Agency. Quote, these are just some of the points. Quote, and this one maybe tells it all. We oppose all government welfare, relief projects, and aid to the poor programs. All these government programs are privacy-invading, paternalistic, demeaning, and inefficient. The proper source of help for such persons is the voluntary efforts of private groups and individuals. Now, in English, do you know what that means? That is goodbye Medicare, goodbye Medicaid, goodbye food stamps, goodbye Head Start, goodbye worker safety programs, goodbye every program passed in the last 80 years which protects working people, the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. And under their idea of freedom, when you are old and when you are sick and you have no money, you will have the freedom to die. No, not a joke. That's their understanding of freedom. They want government removed from virtually every aspect of our lives. The struggle over the last 80 years has been for the rights, R-I-G-H-T-S, the rights of people, the rights of women not to be discriminated, the rights of workers to earn decent wages, the rights of gay people not to be discriminated, the rights of workers to be able to organize. They want all of that gone and take us back to a time when people had no rights at all and they were at the mercy of a handful of wealthy people. Now you add up everything that I've told you about billionaires controlling the political process, billionaires controlling the economy, billionaires trying to dissolve and defeat every major piece of legislation to help working people. And the conclusion is inescapable. If we don't get our act together, these people are going to move us to an oligarchic form of society where a handful of billionaires will control the economy and the political life of this country. And brothers and sisters, that is the struggle of our time,
and a struggle we are not going to lose. Thank you, everyone.